I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. New York City recently mandated that schools select from one of 3 approved reading programs to teach reading. These curriculums, based on what is termed the science of reading, represent a seismic shift in reading education. Why the change? And why, after decades of reading instruction, is it so difficult to settle on an agreed pedagogy? Literacy expert Katie Miles joins me to discuss these new approaches to teaching reading and what we can do to support effective reading practices. Coming up now on EdCast. My guest today is Katie Pace Miles, an associate professor and the director of the Advanced Certificates in Reading Science at Brooklyn College. Dr. Miles's research interests include reading interventions and literacy instruction that is both developmentally appropriate and grounded in the science of reading. She is the author of Reading Ready and Reading Ready for Whole Phonics. Dr. Miles is the co-founder of CUNY Reading Corps, as well as the founder and president of the Reading Institute, which brings free evidence-based tutoring to readers, as well as providing professional development to teachers. Welcome to EdCast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So nice to have you here. I'm going to begin by saying that why are we always having conversations about how to teach reading? We've done any number of shows about it on EdCast, and it seems to be a perennial conversation. Why can't we agree on how to teach reading?
It is quite unfortunate that we're still having this conversation, but it's so important. And I would say that in the moment right now, we're post-pandemic. I can't help but bring it up. And it really shed light on the fact that we still haven't gotten it right. There was such exposure during the pandemic from parents who became teachers in that moment. Unbeknownst to them, they were going to step into that role, and they saw how their children were really struggling. That started this kind of tidal wave, I think, moment. And a lot of times it would be some parents of privilege who started using their voice to say, wait a second, if I have all the means and my child isn't learning how to read, my heart goes out to parents who may not have as many books in the household or whatnot. What's going on there? And then there's been a lot of data that's come out nationally about the national, the NAEP scores. Let me just simplify it. Right? Yeah.
So let me ask you, I always like to ask this of my guests when I do a reading show. How did you learn how to read? Do you remember?
I actually didn't have the easiest time learning how to read. And I think that is part of what propels me to this day.
Do you remember what approach they used with you?
It was definitely, now knowing what I know, it was a balanced literacy approach. It was very holistic. There was a lot of assumptions about what we were going to be able to read when we entered into kindergarten. From there, it was a lot of book reading, very little instruction on how to actually attack the words, analyze the words, support our reading, decoding, encoding of those words.
Okay, we're going to talk about what those words mean in a minute.
Sure.
I always say that I learned how to read with a combination of phonics and Dick and Jane.
Oh, there you go.
I am from the C-Spot run, C-Spot generation, and as well as a lot of fiction books. But it was phonics and Dick and Jane.
I think you're fortunate.
Oh, I have to say that I, for one, always really liked Dick and Jane because they had a lifestyle that was completely foreign to me.
They had a lifestyle.
I like that little suburban house with the fence.
Right.
It was very different from my house. Okay, so
Sure.
We've already touched on why the city has instituted a new way of teaching reading, and you mentioned about seeing that the scores are low, seeing that kids really cannot read. So the thing we're emphasizing now is what people are referring to as the science of reading. I must say, I'm always a little skeptical when I hear things called the science of anything, because sometimes we bandy that term about, but it really is becoming the term that we are using. So tell us, what do we mean by the science of reading?
I'm so glad you asked. The science of reading is actually a field of research. That's what it is. It is a body of research where typically it comes out of experimental psychology, cognitive psychology, educational psychology, school psychology. I could go on and on. It is a field that has investigated how we develop the ability to read and what instructional approaches are evidence-based with regards to what works better than other instructional approaches. the field continues to evolve. It's just like any academic field that keeps moving and progressing every month as new articles are coming out. And so it's not a curriculum, and I think that's often becomes misconstrued with the moment. Yeah.
So let's go to some of the terms that parents are hearing about, and let me rely on your expertise just to take a few moments to tell people what some of these things mean. What is phonics and what is phonemic awareness?
Oh, sure. So we'll actually start with phonemic awareness.
Okay, go ahead.
So phonemic awareness is an individual's ability and awareness of the sounds in a word and your ability to identify and manipulate those sounds. Very simply, in the word cat, we have 3 sounds, k, a, t. Now, sometimes those sounds align very well with the letters that spell those sounds. Other times they don't. So in the word whale, you have 3 sounds, w, e, l, 3 sounds, but you have 5 letters.
Right. Now, again, and phonics.
Phonics, that is our system of letter-sound correspondences that create orthography or our spelling system, and that is what we rely on in order to store words in memory. So phonics it can be a set of letter sound or graphophonetic connections, or it can be an instructional approach. It depends on how you're using it, right? You could be referring to the phonics instruction in a classroom.
So some of that phonics instruction is used to help students decode a word.
That's right.
So I would like to talk briefly again. What is the difference between decoding and encoding?
Sure. So decoding is simply your ability to read the word, and encoding is spelling the word.
Okay, and also at some point understanding what the words mean.
Absolutely. So decoding really does come down, though, to the terms really are that decoding and encoding are these mirror terms. Of when you're decoding, you're using your letter sound knowledge to segment the sounds and blend them together, and you've decoded or read the word. Hopefully that's stored in memory. You can then hopefully at some point accurately encode or spell the word, and you're bringing up such a good point about the usage of the word or the meaning of the word. That's your syntax or semantics, right? You do need that to come into and form this, what my mentor, Dr. Airy, would say, this amalgam where you're going to eventually store the word in memory. You need the pronunciation of the word, the spelling of the word, and the meaning of the word to all come together in order to securely store it.
I've seen 2 things happen with second language learners or multilingual language learners. When they decode a word, they really don't know what the word means. So they decoded a vocabulary word. Or because they have mispronounced the word in the decoding, it is actually a word that they know, but the way that they have said it or read it does not remind them of the word that they know. So let's go back a minute. So since we are changing our programs now, it behooves us to take a moment and a retrospective look back. What have we been doing up until now that we are now changing? Okay. What was the previous approach?
So the previous approach, some will call it balanced literacy. You could call it, some refer to it as typical instruction. It was much more holistic. Don't let the term balanced throw you off there, because that always sounds so nice.
It does,
right? Doesn't it? I would like a balanced approach to life, a balanced diet, all of those things. I do think the intentions were all there to have a curriculum or an approach to teaching reading that ensured that you were addressing all of the essential components of literacy that lift a student off into proficient reading. But what wound up happening was a lot less of what is needed to get up and going with your ability to read, which is explicit systematic approaches to the multitude of words that we have to be able to read and store in memory in quite an opaque language that we exist in, which is English.
I always like to point out, and we spoke about it briefly right before we went on air, that we have learned how to read over the years with the plethora of approaches that have been used. So I always tell parents not to, go crazy with worry, because in the end, people have learned to read with the discredited approaches. Or, when I learned how to read in a way, nobody looks at See-Spot Run anymore. So, and so I was a good reader. So, so somehow that served me well. So I'm just saying, but let's talk about what we're doing right now. Now, I know that you are a literacy expert, Katie, and you've done a lot of looking at the needs of emergent readers. Tell us, what are the needs of emergent readers, and how are they similar or different to the needs of older readers?
So emergent readers, let's say from the time you're in preschool through 2nd grade, I'm going to consider that our emergent reader bucket. And what we really need to ensure is that those students have received instruction in letter sound correspondences. So the alphabet, but not just singing the alphabet, not just having, you always want to have fun in pre-K and kindergarten, I'm never saying that, but at some point we really need to make sure that those letter sound correspondences have been really memorized. While you're doing that, you're having fun with language and the sound structure of language, and you get to the point where you can identify all of these different components of the sound structure. That's your phonological awareness. But then it drills down to your phonemic awareness, which we mentioned before. So then your ability to be able to identify the first or last sound of words, that's going to combine with your letter sound knowledge to help you lift off into blending, segmenting, reading words, and encoding. You really need to have this support in a way that has systematically brings you to the point where you're reading sentences and then books, and then it's eventually this will explode and you'll kind of have this lift off into your literacy. But it takes a lot to get to that point, and no assumptions can be made.
So we're going to talk later about what parents can do and what caregivers can do at home to help move that forward. So let's go to the 3 new mandated programs. As I say in the show's opening, the city is mandating that schools use one of 3 approved programs, and they are called Interreading, Wit and Wisdom, and EL Education. So let's talk about them, why they were selected. Tell me, first of all, why were they selected and how were they selected? What was the process in coming up with these 3 programs?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the New York City Public Schools. They were the ones who selected the programs. But what I understand is that these programs reflect the tenets of structured literacy. So before I talked about balanced literacy or your typical approach to literacy, and now what we talk about is science of reading, or a term that's come out of that field is structured literacy. So structured literacy refers to approaches that are systematic and explicit. They are cumulative, so the skills that you are explicitly taught, the skills that have been thoughtfully put together in a scope and sequence that culminate, that accumulate, right? And we're going back and we're reviewing and we're constantly ensuring that we have mastery, that there's also corrective feedback that's a part of this program, very direct, explicit corrective feedback so that we're not leaving students behind. We're making sure that we're bringing them along with us on this literacy journey into proficient reading. And finally, assessment. So that's a big part of structured literacy is, are you progress monitoring students along the way to ensure that they have, what I just mentioned, mastered those skills? And it's this accountability piece for teaching reading.
Now, so these programs, I'm going to assume, are aligned with the science of reading. Is there any way in which you feel they are not, or?
I will say that what I know about these programs is that they have done a nice job. They have attempted to be as aligned to the process of structured literacy as possible. I'm always leery of saying that anything is science of reading. Science of reading would mean that there is a study on your program, right, that demonstrates that there's some evidence. It doesn't always have to be a randomized controlled trial design. There are 4, there are 4 levels of evidence, and so it means, that your program is using approaches that are evidence-based or research-based from that body of work from the science of reading, and at some point studies have been conducted or your program has been evaluated and it's shown that the program works for all students. And I think that's a big difference.
I have looked at the websites of these 3 programs, and of course they all make claims to having some evidence that shows that they have helped improve student reading, but we can try to talk about that if there's time a little bit later on. As far as I know, I believe the superintendents of each of our city districts are the ones who are responsible for selecting the program for the particular schools in that district.
Thank you for that
reminder.
I
want to talk a little bit about the programs now, the 3 of them, and their similarities and differences, all right, without going into the weeds with them. But I believe the one that was selected most in the city is Interreading.
Yes.
I believe that's the most popular one. So when you look at the 3 of them, again, Interreading, Wit and Wisdom, and EL Education, what do you see as their similarities and what do you see as some of the differences between them?
The similarities for me would be that they're both coming forth right out of the gate with a phonics scope and sequence, and that they have rigorous activities starting in the earliest years to ensure that the students are swiftly moving through this phonics scope and sequence to master these phonetic concepts and to apply them to word reading, spelling, decodable sentence, and then decodable book reading. So that's, I'm seeing that across the board. I'm seeing strong vocabulary work, some really good explicit academic vocabulary coming through in all of the programs. I'm seeing differences around the types of texts being used. And anytime you're selecting a text, it's not just about the decodability of the text, right? We haven't yet talked about comprehension and content. And so inevitably, all three programs are providing different forms of content that knowledge building, let's say.
And this is where they differ, I think,
They
somewhat.
do.
So let's talk a little bit about them. One of them, I think it's intro reading, uses more excerpts, I think that it's defined more as a basal reader kind of an approach. Do they all use some form of literature, some fiction, as far as you know?
I actually, as far as I know, they do use, I'm trying to think of what I recently saw. As far as I know, they do.
I'm a big proponent, I will say right out there, because we have talked about literature not only helping to envelop students in the world of reading, things that are of interest to them, but also producing empathy.
Yes.
That gaining the perspective of another fictive character is a way of building your empathy with other people and the planet around you, and I think that's really important. But I also want to talk about excerpted readings, all right? Now, I have my own beef about that, only because I feel that nowadays we're reading, even in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, that college students don't like to read lengthy pieces. Nobody has the patience or the tolerance to do anything more than scroll, or as college students say, go to ChatGPT and get a summary of the chapter of the book. And I know there is a school in Brooklyn, a gifted and talented school, the Brooklyn School of Inquiry, that actually pushed real hard to get out of the mandated programs because they wanted more literature. So do you have any reservations of your own, not of a particular program, but the approach that we may be using of excerpted readings or basal readers or not that much lengthy pieces? What do you think? Should we be worried? Should I just get over it? I mean,
no, I think you're
what do
making
you think?
I think you're making a great point. And I was hesitating when you asked me, actually, when you mentioned literature. I actually paused because I was thinking to myself, okay, are you referring to the literature that is a part of their program?
No, I mean, fiction, stories.
Okay, and that's actually why I was pausing, because I was thinking, if you mean what I think of as literature is actually books that I select because I'm genuinely interested in that book, that is left to the school's discretion. And that is going to come down to scheduling, right? And so if there's this mandate to use these programs, the programs take a lot of time to implement, right? And there's only so much time in a school day. And so ensuring that we're carving out time for students to still find what you're talking about, that love of reading. And the way you're building empathy through reading is, yes, sometimes someone gives you the book you need to read, but a lot of times you're seeking out a book that interests you, and then that's going to build that empathy, because there was some spark in you that wants to learn more about that as well.
I say that has been my biggest concern about the emphasis on phonics, is that it may be pushing out other aspects of reading that are important. As I always say, again, look, I don't know that I had the best way of learning how to read. I learned how to read. But I always had teachers, even in those days, that emphasized reading literature, that even with that we had to read a lot of books. You know? And so, all right, so let's go back a minute, though, to my fond remembrance of Dick and Jane. And that really was what we call sight words. So let's talk a little bit about sight words. And they are really familiar words, or words that are high frequency words. Tell us what sight words are, and is there still a place for them in these new curriculums?
Yes, so this is actually a part of half of my research is on high dosage tutoring, and half of it is on this concept of sight words. And in the research realm, we actually sight words refer to any word that has been securely stored in memory. Now, the best way to securely store a word in memory is actually to go through a decoding process. Sometimes you need to decode the word once or twice, and lucky for you, it's in there. And other times, students need to decode the word 20, 50, 100 times before it's in there. So in the research realm, that's the term sight words. But in the practitioner realm or in schools, sight words often refers to a list of words that are actually just high frequency words. Yes.
That's a great distinction. I did not know that.
No
That's
problem.
really interesting. Okay.
Yes.
So do we teach sight words in the same way we sometimes have to teach irregular verb forms, because you don't learn them as intuitively, as you might something with an ed ending when you're learning language. So do we show students still those lists of words, or are they still emphasized in school?
Well, one of the reasons that we used this list of words back previously was that there was this assumption that these words were so irregularly spelled that students couldn't decode the words, and therefore these words just had to be memorized. But some of my research and my research with my colleagues, we've analyzed these lists of words, and we demonstrate that if you have a really strong phonic scope and sequence, and you apply those rules that you're going to teach to this set of words, overwhelmingly the list of words are decodable.
Right.
And so you shouldn't use your mental energy just trying to flashcard and memorize those words. You should apply those decoding skills, which we then know is the best way to securely store the word in memory.
Okay. Now, we are already coming down to the wire on time, and there are two important things I want to talk about. I hope that teachers are being given enough professional development to unpack these systems. I don't know that we have time to go into that, but just briefly, is PD part of the package here?
PD
for
is a part,
teachers
yes.
to really know how to get familiar when.
PD is, I also want to say, those of us in the field have put forth, I have a micro-credential that's a 10-hour introduction to reading science. I built it for teachers. I filmed in the New York City public schools, so I give a mini lecture, and then we see what this element looks like in action in schools. So I'd like to, and we're distributing that and sharing that as widely as possible.
And that's a professional development program for teachers who are using these new approaches.
What it is, it doesn't refer to the programs. The programs come with their own professional learning.
They do, okay.
This, what I was noticing was a gap was in how did we get to this point of needing these new programs, and what's different? Like the questions you've been asking me, what is the science of reading? What are how do we develop the ability to do X, Y, and Z? And so that's what I put in. It's more of a knowledge building.
Provide the
reading
background
science.
that people need to move forward with the programs, which is really a great aspect of how we even learn anything.
That's right.
Again, very quickly,
yes.
I want two things I hope we can cover quickly.
Yes.
What can parents do to help improve their children's emergent literacy? And I know you run some very fine tutoring programs and reading institutes. What are the hallmarks of a good tutoring program? So quickly, what can parents and caregivers do at home?
Great. So the most important thing and the simplest thing parents and caregivers can do at home is talk to your children as much as possible, use as much academic language as possible, don't shy away from that, and read as much as possible, and model reading yourself. And as much as you can, read to your children. And that is the basics. That is as easy as I can deliver that advice. When you see your child needing some more explicit instruction, there are many free resources out there and available, and you can step in and serve as a support system for your child at home to boost some of these instructional and these developmental milestones that occur along the way.
You know, I often tell parents as well, my friends, you don't have to stop reading out loud to your children the minute they learn how to read.
Right.
Kids love to be read to. 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds.
Oh, yes.
They like to hear a story. So don't feel that once they're reading, you shouldn't be reading stories. You should be.
My goodness.
Now, in terms of tutoring, we have the Community Reading Corps, and you have a Reading Institute. Tell us again quickly.
Yes.
What would be the hallmarks of effective tutoring? What are the services that you do offer?
So effective tutoring needs to be high dosage. So high dosage meaning that it is 3 to 5 days a week. That's going to be the best bang for your buck, so long as it is also a form of a structured intervention, structured literacy intervention. So those components that I talked about before, it being explicit, systematic, cumulative, corrective feedback, that's on-the-spot feedback with assessments, that's what you're looking for in a tutoring program. If a student needs tutoring, there's really no time to waste. You want to build the social emotional piece, so please don't think of me as this like hardcore, I don't think anyone gets maybe that impression from me, but you want to build social emotional relationships, you want to be culturally relevant, that goes without saying. You also want to make sure you are maximizing the student's time if they are missing some of these skills.
Okay.
In addition to that, well, I don't
No,
yes.
I'm probably running out of time, but thank you. Maybe we can put some of your resources up.
That would be great.
On the show. I think we will do that later. Quickest question of all, Chancellor Banks will be resigning or will be stepping down soon. Do you see any big changes in the offing with the new chancellor?
I don't.
Melissa
And I
Avila Ramos.
I think that there's so much momentum. The science of reading has been here for decades before the chancellor. We were heading in this direction anyway, with other states adopting instructional approaches that are evidence-based or aligned to the science of reading. New York was hopefully going to come around one way or the other. And here we are. And what I'm seeing when I go into schools is that teachers are having a really good time doing this. I know it's been really hard for teachers, so I want to acknowledge that first and foremost. Once they get the hang of it, though, I've seen some of the best instruction I've ever seen in the New York City public schools.
I think you're going to have to come back because we still have to talk about assessment. I mean,
oh, I would love to.
I mean, how do we know that these programs are working? Are we doing assessment?
Great question. The New York City Public Schools should be putting out an evaluation. I'm a researcher that has inquired about the Acadian scores.
How are the national picture looking at this approach, science of reading? It has been used already in other states. Do we have any data, any evidence about?
We do. We have data from quite a few states that have made dramatic shifts. Mississippi is the one that's called the Mississippi Miracle, even though Mississippi, my colleagues on there will say it's the Mississippi Marathon. They went from what I believe was the 49th state in the country in their rankings up to the 21st. And it was because they adopted reading science-aligned approaches. They did a lot of teacher retraining, and I just want to put a plug out there for my advanced certificates in reading science at Brooklyn College, which is a really deep dive into what do we mean when we're talking about these shifts in instruction and the science of reading.
Well, we are completely out of time.
Sure.
I want to thank you so much. You've been so informative. And I do really think that we are going to have you come back to talk more about what we are learning as this process is being evolving and unfolding and how teachers are doing. There's so much to talk about. Thank you so much. Katie Miles of Brooklyn College. It's been a pleasure to have you on EdCast.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of EdCast. Thanks for watching. See you next time, and read a book. Bye.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.